Hello and welcome. The program today is a little different. I'm not going to be talking about the Devonian. I was doing some research and ran across some new material about the Aztecs. I've been always fascinated with them, and I just decided I'd like to talk to them about them. Now, there is a connection, though. The Aztecs built their main capital, Tenochtitlan, in the middle of a lake, and these were a series of lakes, Texcoco and other related lakes in the Valley of Mexico. And the trouble is, it was very hard to build on these islands because they're very swampy, and you needed something to keep the buildings that they built from sinking into the water. And they ended up in that situation basically because of an incident, a very bad case of table manners. The Aztecs themselves were a wandering group of Chichimecs, which means dog people. They were just wandering around out in the desert. They came into the valley. They had no place to live, so they rented themselves out as mercenaries for some of the other city-states. And the most powerful one found that they really liked having them around. They were good rent-a-mob thugs. And the king, in fact, even decided that he wanted to do an alliance with them and offered them his daughter to their king. He thought this was a very good thing to do. The Aztecs thought so too. But their ideas of what was proper were a little different than the Tehanics. So the king of the Tehanics then shows up at his daughter's wedding and found that the Aztecs had killed her and sacrificed her, tore out her heart, and offered her up as a sacrifice to one of their gods. This was not something he was expecting, and he was not happy about it. So his men declared war upon the Aztecs and chased them into the lake, so that they had to live on these islands, the only land that they could find, and slowly build them up with what we call floating gardens. They're not really floating gardens. The lakes themselves are very shallow, and you had slow accumulation of silt, just like with the shallow sea that had existed in this area that gave us the Marcellus shale deposits. But the lakes themselves were very shallow. There was only about 7 feet average depth. The deepest are about 15 feet. So what they did was they would pile the earth up until they created these fields. They weren't really floating. They were just little mounds of earth that they put canals between. And but unfortunately, whatever they built would sink into the soil. So they came up with the idea that the ancient Romans and the Venetians had already done. They're called pylons. They take these sticks about 2-3 inches thick, drive them into the ground, and create a foundation that way to be able to build their buildings. So they built up this huge city of about 50,000 people, as their capital, called Tenochtitlan. But they also built a second city just north of it on the same group of artificial islands called Tlatelolco, which was their big commercial center. And they had merchants going all over what we call an empire, but they're just the biggest guys on the block, and they were dominating all the other people around them. And the merchants were actually spies. They would spy on the other peoples to see what they're up against, and if anybody didn't like having the Aztecs around. So the Aztecs built this really area of hegemony, and they would extract tribute from the different groups around them. They even turned the Tlaxcalans in the next valley over as a reserve for human sacrifices. They'd say, okay, we're not going to extract gold or silver from you, we're not going to take copper from you, but we'll just have these periodic wars. And you go to war with us, we go to war with you. We don't kill your men, you don't kill our men. In battle, we capture your men, we take them back and sacrifice them. You capture our guys, take them back and sacrifice them, and offer them up to your gods. The Tlaxcalans didn't exactly like that. So when Cortez came along and entered Tenochtitlan, or at least got to the shoreline of Lake Texcoco, he had his men with him, just about 200 men, but he had 50,000 Tlaxcalans, because the Tlaxcalans didn't like being dominated by the Aztecs. So the Aztecs dominated the Tlaxcalans, they dominated the Totonacs along the coast, and the Huatecs north of them. And the Huatecs were, in fact, Mayan-speaking people. They dominated the Mixtecs, the Zapotecs, and again, they extracted these tributes, but they really didn't rule them. What I found interesting, and I could never figure out until a while ago, why they never conquered the Mayans. The Mayans were still in existence in the post-classical period in the Yucatan, in these small petty states. Now, the classic Mayan civilization was a great civilization, but it was actually a Stone Age civilization. They had no gold, they had no silver. They knew about copper, but they only used it sparingly. Everything, though, was Stone Age, but they had writing. They had these great cities. But at the end of the classical period, they abandoned most of the cities, and the cities, though, in the Yucatan, like Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and Uxmal, continued on. But eventually they were abandoned too. So by the time of the Spanish conquest, the Mayans were living in these small little petty city-states. Now they had some rather substantial ones away from the Aztecs, like Teasel, the capital of the Itzas, and others in the highlands, but the Aztecs didn't have any direct contact with them. They were just looking at the people in the Yucatan, and they really didn't want to go to war with the Mayans. This also goes back to table manners. Why? Because they would take, if they were going to take prisoners from the Mayans, they would take them, sacrifice them to their gods, and they would be basically food for the gods. But the Aztecs didn't want to sacrifice the Mayans. They thought that the Mayans were so decrepit and corrupt by that time that if they offered the Mayans up to sacrifice for their Aztec gods, they would give their gods indigestion. So an empire was built basically because of poor table manners and a terrible faux pas at a wedding, and also explains why they never conquered the Mayans or tried to extract tribute from them. This is all about history and finding out why things work, why everything comes out the way it does. And it's always fascinating how different stories can be from group to group and situation to situation. So there'll be more tomorrow, so stay tuned. Thank you.